The morning Zora Mae Tatum turned 9 years old, she woke up before the sun. Not because anyone had asked her to, not because there was a birthday breakfast waiting or a present set out on the kitchen table with a bow on it. She woke up because that was what Zora did. She woke up ahead of everything, ahead of the noise, ahead of the day itself, and she lay still in the dark listening to the apartment breathe. She could tell a lot about how the day was going to go just from lying still in the morning. She could hear when the pipes in the wall were running wrong, that low groan that meant the heat was struggling. She could hear when her mother had already been up for hours, the soft click of cabinet doors being opened and closed more carefully than they needed to be. Her mother's way of being quiet when she was tired but didn't want Zora to know. She could hear, through the thin wall she shared with Mrs. Claudette next door, whether the old woman's television was already on, which meant Mrs. Claudette hadn't slept well and would need someone to check on her before school. Zora noticed things. She had always noticed things. Her grandmother Nana Rose used to say that the Lord gave some children extra eyes, not in their heads, but in their chests. The kind of eyes that didn't see shapes and colors, but felt what was wrong before anyone else could name it. Zora had those eyes. She sat up now, her hair pressed flat on one side, her feet finding the cool floor. The apartment was in the part of Chicago called Pilsen, on the third floor of a building that had been old when her mother moved in and had gotten considerably older since. The walls were painted a color that had started as cream and was now something between yellow and apology. The window in Zora's room looked out onto an alley and a fire escape that the super had been meaning to fix since before Zora was born. None of this bothered Zora. She knew every creak in the floor, every draft that came under the bathroom door in winter, every shortcut the roaches took when they thought no one was watching. This was her world, and she understood it completely. Her mother, Dina Tatum, was in the kitchen when Zora patted in. Dina was already in her uniform, the dark pants and pale blue shirt she wore to the Meridian Grand Hotel, where she worked in the housekeeping department. She was standing at the counter eating crackers because there was nothing else ready yet. She didn't turn when Zora came in. She didn't need to. "You're up early," Dina said. "I know." Zora climbed onto the kitchen stool. "Happy birthday to me." Dina turned then, and her face did the thing it did when she was holding something complicated behind her expression, a small tightening around the eyes, a press of the lips that was trying very hard to become a smile. "Happy birthday, baby." She reached out and smoothed Zora's hair on the crushed side, gently, like she was petting something fragile. "I've got something for you when I get home tonight." Zora studied her mother's face. Dina Tatum was 31 years old and looked like someone who had been 31 for a long time. She was a beautiful woman. Zora knew that, even if her mother couldn't see it, with a wide, still face and hands that were always slightly dry from the cleaning supplies, no matter how much lotion she used. She had taken a second shift this week, which meant she left at 6:30 in the morning and didn't come back until 9 at night. Zora did the math without meaning to, the way she always did math without meaning to. 15 hours. Her mother had been working 15-hour days for 11 days straight. "I know there's something for Mrs. Claudette," Dina continued, pressing the crackers into a paper towel. "She told me yesterday she made your pound cake." "I know," Zora said. "I smelled it through the wall last night." Dina smiled, and this time it was real. "Of course you did." She kissed the top of Zora's head. "There's cereal, and the money for the bus is on the counter. You go straight to school and come straight home and wait for Mrs. Claudette until I get back." "I always do." "I know you do." Another kiss. "That's my girl." The door closed, and Zora listened to her mother's footsteps go down the 3 flights of stairs. She could tell her mother's footsteps from everyone else's, knew the particular rhythm of them. The way the left foot came down slightly harder than the right, because of the old injury she never talked about. She counted them down. 16 steps to the second landing, 14 to the first, 12 across the lobby and out. Then the building was quiet, and Zora ate her cereal. Underscore. School was Roosevelt Elementary, 7 blocks away. Zora knew the walk the way she knew her own hands. The cracked section of sidewalk on Cermak where you had to step left or you'd catch your toe. The corner store where Mr. Obby gave her a piece of hard candy, sometimes if he was in a good mood. The mural on the side of the community center that showed a woman in a gold dress holding up something that looked like the sky. Today, walking to school, Zora was thinking about the hotel. She thought about it a lot. Not the way some kids at school thought about fancy places, with a kind of longing that made them soft in the face and distant in the eyes. Zora thought about it practically. She had been inside the Meridian Grand exactly once, 2 years ago, when she'd had to bring her mother's forgotten work ID to the service entrance because there hadn't been anyone else to do it. She had stood in the staff corridor for 4 minutes while someone went to find her mother, and in those 4 minutes, she had looked, the way she always looked, carefully, completely, storing everything. The Meridian Grand Hotel was 43 floors of glass and steel at the edge of the river, the kind of building that didn't apologize for being large. It had 680 rooms, a rooftop restaurant that people waited 6 months to get into, and a lobby that Zora had seen through the glass and brass front doors, all pale marble and flowers the size of small trees. Her mother cleaned the rooms on the 18th and 19th floors. She changed 412 sheets a week. Zora had calculated if the hotel was running at full occupancy. She carried cleaning supplies that were heavy enough to ache your back if you did it long enough, and she did it every day except Sundays. Zora did not think about this with anger. She thought about it the way she thought about most things, clearly, directly, the way you look at a map. She was going to fix it. She didn't know exactly how yet, but she had been noticing things since she was 4 years old. And she had learned that if you noticed enough, the how always eventually showed itself. Today was a half day at school because of a teacher training, which meant Zora was done by noon. She collected her things, said goodbye to her teacher, and walked back through Pilsen toward home. It was a Friday in October, one of those Chicago October days where the sky is a blue so clean it almost doesn't look real, and the wind off the lake makes every tree sound like it's arguing with something. She was on Michigan Avenue, having taken the long way because she liked the river on Fridays when she saw the crowd. Not a big crowd. Maybe 15 people gathered on the sidewalk outside the entrance to a building she recognized, the Meridian Grand. They were gathered loosely, the way people gathered when something was happening, but they weren't sure if it was their business to look. Zora slid through the edge of the crowd without effort. She was small for 9 and had learned that small and quiet got you places that loud and large never did. She could see now what had drawn the crowd. There was a man on the sidewalk. He was older, maybe 50, dressed in a suit that fit him perfectly, the kind of suit that understood its own importance. He was sitting on the edge of one of the stone planters outside the hotel entrance, and he was holding the side of his head with both hands, and his face was the color of chalk. Around him, 2 hotel doormen stood helplessly, and a woman in a sharp black dress, who was probably a manager, was speaking urgently into a radio. "We need someone at the front entrance." "A guest has, yes." The front entrance. Zora stood at the edge of the small crowd and looked. The man was breathing. She could see that. His chest was moving, but his color was wrong, and his hands were shaking, and there was something about the particular way his head was bent that Zora recognized without being able to name. She had seen that angle of suffering before. In Mrs. Claudette once, before her blood pressure crisis last winter. In Mr. Obby from the corner store at the time, he'd had the heat stroke in August. This was a body that was reaching the edge of something. She looked at the door. The door to the Meridian Grand Hotel was a revolving door, the heavy kind that spun slowly on its own weight. The brass was polished to a mirror shine, and attached to the frame, in a place that Zora had to look carefully to see. You wouldn't notice it unless you were the kind of person who looked at everything. Was a small rectangular panel with a red indicator light. A panel she recognized. She had seen a panel exactly like it in the building they'd visited on a school field trip to the Science Museum, where the teacher had explained what it was. The indicator light was red. Zora looked at the light. She looked at the door. She looked at the man. She looked at the man again, more carefully. He was getting up, or trying to. One of the doormen reached for his arm to help him, and the man waved him off with the automatic authority of someone who had spent decades not needing help. He was pushing himself upright, steadying himself against the stone planter, squaring his shoulders with an effort that cost him visibly. He was on try to walk through that door. Zora moved. She was through the edge of the crowd before she fully decided to move, the way she always acted, her body making the choice and her mind catching up afterward. She was 5 steps away from the man when he took his first step toward the revolving door, 3 steps when he raised his hand to push it, 2 steps when she said, clearly and without hesitation, "Don't touch that door." The man stopped. The doorman stopped. The manager stopped talking into her radio. The 15 people on the edge of the crowd went very still in the particular way that crowds go still when a child says something that surprises a man in a $1,000 suit. The man turned and looked at her. His eyes were dark gray and, even right now, even with his face that wrong color and his hands that slight tremor, they were sharp, alert, the eyes of someone used to assessing situations quickly. "Excuse me," he said. His voice was controlled, the kind of control that cost effort. "What did you say?" Zora pointed at the panel beside the door. "That light is red," she said. "The door's broken. If you push it and it catches, it'll spin wrong." She paused. "You'd fall." There was a silence. One of the doormen started to say something. Probably some version of "the door is fine, little girl," but the other doorman looked where Zora was pointing and went quiet. The man in the suit looked at the panel. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked back at Zora. "How do you know what that is?" he said. "School field trip," Zora said. "Safety sensors in revolving doors. When the light's red, the clutch is disengaged. It means someone already got stuck in there and the mechanism overcorrected. If you push hard, it'll spin faster than it should." Another silence. The manager was already moving toward the panel, speaking rapidly into her radio. "We need facilities at the front entrance now. The sensor is showing red. The door needs to be locked out." The man was still looking at Zora. "Who are you?" he asked. Zora looked at him with the particular directness that had been making adults uncomfortable since she was 4. "I'm Zora," she said. "You should sit back down. You don't look good." Something crossed the man's face that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite offense. He looked at her for another beat. Then, very slowly, he sat back down on the edge of the planter. One of the doormen was already on his radio, calling for the hotel's medical staff. The manager was on her phone. The crowd had thinned slightly, the way crowds did when the drama shifted from something acute to something managed. Zora stood where she was. "I'm fine," the man said, mostly to himself. "I just needed a moment." "You've been sitting there for 4 minutes," Zora said. "That's not a moment." He looked at her again. "You were watching me?" "I was watching the door," she said. "Then I was watching you." A pause. "Mainly the door." His name, she learned later, was Marcus Elliott Hale. She didn't learn it from him. Not right then. Right then, she learned it from the quiet conversation between the 2 hotel managers who had appeared within minutes of the medical team. The way managers appeared in a crisis, materializing from somewhere she hadn't seen, speaking in low, rapid voices. She caught the name in fragments. "Mr. Hale, the Hale Suite. We need to call his office." She caught a number 2, the way she always caught numbers without trying. Suite 4102. The medical team, 2 people in Navy uniforms who arrived with quiet efficiency, had gotten Mr. Hale onto a chair they'd brought through the side entrance, the one that didn't involve the broken revolving door. They were checking his blood pressure and speaking to him in the calm, practiced tones of people who did this regularly. He was answering them in short, clipped sentences that said he was present and alert but not happy about any of this. Zora should have left. She knew she should have left. Her mother's instructions lived in her body like a compass. Straight to school, straight home, wait for Mrs. Claudette. She had done the school part. Home was 11 blocks away. She stood on the sidewalk and did not leave. The manager in the sharp black dress, her name badge said Leanne, guest relations, came back through the side entrance and found Zora still there. She looked surprised. "You're still here, sweetheart?" "Yes, ma'am." Leanne looked at her more carefully. Do you? Are your parents nearby? My mom's at work. A small calculation crossed Leanne's face. And you were just passing by. Yes, ma'am. And you knew about the sensor. Zora nodded. Leanne studied her for a moment. What's your name? Zora Tatum. Leanne looked at her for another beat. Then she said, not unkindly, you should probably get home, Zora. We have everything handled now. But she paused, and something shifted in her expression, something that was trying to figure out how to say what it was trying to say. Thank you. What you did might have been more important than you know. Zora looked at the side entrance. He was going to fall, she said. He was already dizzy. He would have pushed the door, and it would have spun and knocked him down. Yes, Leanne said. He might have. Is he going to be okay? Leanne's expression moved again. I think so. His team is with him now. She paused. Do you need anything? Do you need a bus pass? Or I'm fine, Zora said. Thank you. She picked up her backpack and walked. Underscore. If this story already has you leaning in, hit that like button and subscribe to Bound Hearts. And drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. She didn't hesitate for a second. Let's see if you can stay with her all the way to the end. She told Mrs. Claudette about it over pound cake. Mrs. Claudette was 74 and had been living next door since before Dina Tatum had moved in, which made her, in some essential way, furniture, the best kind, the kind that was warm and always in the right place. She sat across from Zora at her small kitchen table with her arms folded and her head tilted at the angle that meant she was listening seriously. And you just walked up and told him, Mrs. Claudette said. I said, don't touch the door, Zora said, fork moving through the pound cake. This was extraordinary pound cake. I wasn't rude. No, I know you weren't rude. You don't do rude. Mrs. Claudette unfolded her arms and refolded them, thinking, but you don't know who this man is. Mr. Hale, Zora said. Marcus Hale, Mrs. Claudette said, and something in her voice changed in a way that made Zora look up. You know him. I know of him. Mrs. Claudette reached over and turned down the television that was always on low in the background. That was a significant gesture. Mrs. Claudette didn't turn down her television lightly. Marcus Hale, he's the one that owns the Hale Group. Construction, real estate, development. A pause. He's the one that's been buying up properties over on the west side. Been in the news. Zora thought about this while she ate her cake. He was sick, she said. I believe you. Mrs. Claudette looked at her steadily. Zora Mae, that man is one of the most powerful people in this city. Zora chewed, swallowed. He still would have fallen, she said. Mrs. Claudette was quiet for a moment. Then she made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something more complicated. Yes, she said. He would have. And you were the one who stopped it. She reached across and patted Zora's hand once, the way she did when she was trying to say something that words weren't quite right for. Don't tell your mama until I do. She'll worry. Underscore. Tatum came home at 9:17. Zora was at the kitchen table doing homework when the door opened. She looked up and said nothing because her mother's face told her tonight was not a night for easy conversation. Dina moved through the apartment in the methodical way she moved when she was past tired, hanging her uniform jacket, washing her hands at the kitchen sink for exactly the amount of time it took, filling a glass of water and standing at the counter to drink it. Then she looked at her daughter. How was school? Half day. Good. We had a substitute in math, and she didn't know how to work the projector. Dina almost smiled. Did you help her? A little. She still couldn't get it. Dina set down her glass. Happy birthday, baby. She went to the cabinet above the refrigerator, which was where she kept the few things she didn't want Zora reaching, and came back with a small paper bag. Inside was a paperback, the third book in a series about the black girl archaeologist that Zora had been working through, and a birthday card that had clearly been chosen carefully, the kind with the good paper and the silver writing. Zora read the card 3 times. Her mother had written inside it in her cramped, careful handwriting, "You see things the rest of us miss. Never stop. Love, Mama." Zora looked up. Her mother was watching her. "I love you," Zora said. Dina Tatum, who was 31 years old and worked 15-hour days and had dry hand from cleaning supplies and a left foot that came down harder than the right, smiled. Not the complicated smile, not the holding something back smile. The real one. "I love you back," she said. "Now tell me about your day." Zora looked at her mother's face. She thought about what Mrs. Claudette had said, "Don't tell your mama until I do." She thought about the man on the planter with his chalk-white face. She thought about the red indicator light. "It was good," she said. "Mrs. Graham gave us half the afternoon off." She would tell her mother everything. Just not tonight. Tonight her mother had worked 15 hours and needed the real smile to stay real. Zora was 9 years old, and she already understood that some things could wait. Marcus Elliott Hale had not, in 53 years of living, been told what to do by a child. He had been told what to do by his father, until he wasn't. By his board of directors, until he'd restructured that arrangement. By the city council, until he'd learned how councils actually worked. By his ex-wife, briefly, and that was a story he didn't revisit. He sat in the Hale suite on the 41st floor of the Meridian Grand Hotel, where he stayed whenever he was in Chicago for more than 2 nights, and he looked at his own hands and thought about a 9-year-old girl who had told him not to touch a door. The medical staff had determined, with some difficulty, because he had been a reluctant patient, that his blood pressure had spiked dangerously, likely in response to the stress of the past 72 hours. He was not having a cardiac event, they told him. He was having a warning. He had been advised to rest for 24 hours and to follow up with his personal physician in New York. He had sent the medical staff away and called his assistant, Colin, who arrived within 11 minutes because Colin always arrived within 11 minutes, which was one of the primary reasons Marcus had employed him for 8 years. The door sensor, Marcus said before Colin could begin the efficient rundown he had clearly prepared on the elevator ride up. Colin blinked. "I'm sorry." The revolving door on the main entrance. The sensor was showing red. Colin pulled out his tablet, typed something. "I'll have it checked." "It's already been checked. I'm telling you it happened." Marcus looked out the window. From the 41st floor, Chicago spread out in all directions, the lake on the right catching the late afternoon light, the city grid running west and south like lines on a map that had been drawn by someone very organized. He had always loved cities from height. They made more sense from up here. You could see where things connected. "A child saw it," he said. "She was passing by. She stopped and told me not to touch the door." Colin waited. The way he waited when he sensed that Marcus was processing something an interruption would be unwelcome. "She knew what the sensor was," Marcus said. She explained the mechanism. "How old?" "Young. 8 or 9, I think." He paused. "She was watching me the whole time. Not the way people watch when something dramatic is happening. The way you watch when you're working something out." He paused again. "She told me I didn't look good." Colin made a sound that was carefully neutral. "She was correct," Marcus said. "I didn't look good." He turned from the window. Colin was standing at the edge of the room in the particular posture that meant he was being paid to be present and was being paid to be useful, but wasn't sure which of those things was currently required. Marcus had hired him for that judgment as much as for his efficiency. "Find out who she is," Marcus said. Colin looked up from his tablet. "I'm sorry." The girl. Her name was Zora. She told the guest relations manager. "Find out who she is." Colin typed. And the purpose of, "I want to know who saw my knees giving out and told me not to fall," Marcus said, with a sharpness that he was aware was unfair and did not retract. "Find her." Colin nodded. The tablet went back up. He would find her. Colin always found things. While Colin was finding her, Marcus sat in the chair by the window and thought about the other thing. The thing that had driven his blood pressure to its dangerous spike was not a secret, exactly. It was something worse, a situation that was becoming a problem at the precise moment he did not have the resources to manage it, because every resource he had was currently deployed elsewhere. The Hale Group was in the middle of the largest development deal of its 30-year history, a mixed-use project on the South Lakefront that had taken 4 years to put together, required the cooperation of 3 city council members and 2 state-level officials, and was currently sitting on a foundation of agreements that were more complicated than they appeared in the press materials. At the center of those agreements was his lead counsel and business partner of 12 years, a man named Gerard Marsh. Marcus had learned 3 days ago that Gerard had been quietly, methodically, and with considerable ingenuity, renegotiating certain key terms of certain key agreements with certain parties, not on behalf of the Hale Group, but on behalf of a competing interest. A competing interest that, when Marcus's investigators had finished their first pass, appeared to have been funded in part by Gerard himself. 12 years. Marcus turned this number over the way you turn something sharp over in your hand, carefully, without pressing too hard. 12 years, and Gerard Marsh had been his closest colleague, the person who sat across from him in the room where decisions were made, the person whose judgment he had trusted because he had watched it prove itself, over and over, in situations where good judgment meant the difference between a deal and a disaster. And it had been, what? An arrangement? A calculation? Gerard had looked at their partnership, and looked at something else, and decided that something else was worth more. Marcus pressed 2 fingers to his temple and breathed. The other problem, the more immediately dangerous problem, the one that had driven his blood pressure into its crisis range, was that tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock there was a meeting, a signing, the final step in the lakefront agreement, the one that locked everything into place and made the development real in the way that only ink on paper and money in accounts made things real. Gerard was supposed to be in that meeting. More specifically, 3 of the parties across the table from Marcus in that meeting were people whose trust had been established over the past 4 years, primarily through Gerard's relationship with them. Gerard had been the face of certain conversations. Gerard had been the guarantor of certain assurances. If Gerard was not in that room, Marcus would have to explain why, and any explanation for why his lead counsel and business partner of 12 years was suddenly absent from the most important signing of their shared career was going to be, at minimum, a problem, and at maximum, a catastrophe. He had 24 hours and no Gerard and a blood pressure that had staged a protest on his behalf this afternoon on the sidewalk of the Meridian Grand. He looked at his hands again. A 9-year-old girl had told him not to touch the door. For reasons he did not fully examine, he found this steadying. Colin reported back at 7:15 p.m. He stood in the doorway of the suite's living area with his tablet and his neutral expression and said, "Her name is Zora Mae Tatum. She's 9 years old. She lives in Pilsen on West 21st. Her mother is Dina Tatum, who works in housekeeping here at the hotel." Marcus looked up from the documents he had been reviewing. "Here," he said, 18th floor. Colin consulted the tablet. "She's been on staff for 6 years. Strong performance record. No issues noted." Marcus absorbed this. A child who worked out sensor mechanics from a school field trip, whose mother cleaned rooms in the building the sensor was on, who had been passing by on her way home from school on her 9th birthday. "She knew about the hotel," he said. Colin waited. "She didn't react to the building the way children usually react," Marcus said. He was thinking out loud, which he rarely did, and was aware of it and did it anyway. She wasn't looking at it with wonder or anything like that. She was looking at it the way you look at somewhere you've thought about. A pause. "Her mother works here. Colin said nothing helpful and nothing unhelpful. Is there anything else? Marcus asked. She attends Roosevelt Elementary. She's in the 4th grade. Colin glanced at his tablet. She tested into an accelerated math program in 3rd grade. The school records indicate her teacher nominated her for a competitive scholarship program, the kind for middle school placement, but the application deadline is next month, and her mother hasn't been able to complete the documentation because of her work hours. Marcus was quiet for a moment. How do you know that? Colin allowed himself a small expression that was almost a smile. You told me to find out who she is. I found out who she is. The call came to the Hale suite at 8:45 p.m. Not from Gerard. Gerard's phone was going to voicemail, which was either a statement or a strategic silence, and either way told Marcus something important. The call was from Portia Hale, his daughter. Portia was 27 and lived in New York and worked for a design firm and was, in Marcus's considered opinion, the most perceptive person he had ever known, including himself, on his best days, which this was not. She also had a gift for calling at the exact moment when her father was sitting alone in a hotel room at a low point and needed someone who would not pretend that he was not at a low point. He answered, "Dad." Her voice was the same as it had always been, slightly warm, slightly direct, carrying the particular frequency of someone who loved you and was not fooled by you. Colin called me. I told Colin not to. You told Colin to call me if your blood pressure spiked. You set that protocol up 2 years ago. Don't be dramatic. A pause. Marcus looked at the ceiling of the suite. I'm fine. You're in a hotel room in Chicago alone working on the thing with Gerard instead of resting like the medical team told you to. I'm resting. You're reading the Gerard files. I can hear you turning pages. He set the documents down. Dad, Portia said, and her voice shifted to the frequency she used when she was being careful. What's the actual status? He told her. Not everything. There were things he had not yet told Portia about Gerard, the full scope of it, because some part of him had not yet finished believing it himself. But he told her about the meeting tomorrow, about the problem of Gerard's absence, about the parties who trusted Gerard's face and what it would mean for them not to see it. Portia listened without interrupting, which was not her natural state, but something she had learned. You could postpone, she said, when he was done. I cannot postpone. You could explain. I will not explain. Not yet. Not until I have more of the picture. Another silence. He could hear her thinking. What would it take, she asked, for the meeting to work without Gerard? Someone who knows the material as well as he does. Someone those 3 men will trust, or at least not distrust. Someone who can sit in that room and be steady. Do you have anyone? He thought about the thin list of people he trusted and how much thinner it had gotten in the past 72 hours. I'm working on it. Okay, Portia said. Get some sleep. At least 4 hours. Yes, Portia. I mean it, Dad. I'll call Colin. I'm aware you'll call Colin. I love you, she said, with a no-nonsense delivery that was her version of warmth. I love you, he said, in a way that was not no-nonsense at all. He set down the phone. He looked out at Chicago, the grid, the lake, the lights. He thought about Zora Tatum, 9 years old, standing on the sidewalk, looking at him with the eyes of someone who had been paying attention. He thought about her mother, who worked on the 18th floor of this building and had not completed a scholarship application because she didn't have enough hours in her days. He picked up his phone and sent Colin a message. Give me everything on the Meridian Grand Staff record for D. Tatum, and find out what documentation the Roosevelt Elementary Scholarship Program requires. Colin's response came back in 40 seconds. Already have the former. We'll have the latter by morning. Marcus set the phone on the bedside table. He did not sleep for 4 hours. He slept for 6. He had not slept 6 consecutive hours in 3 weeks. He did not examine why. Underscore. Zora Tatum did not expect to see the man again. She had thought about him on the walk home Saturday, not in the way you thought about things that scared you or confused you, but in the way she thought about problems, which was to say she turned him over a few times in her mind, looked at the shape of him from different angles, and then set him aside as a thing she didn't have enough information to complete. What she was thinking about, more urgently, was the scholarship application. She had not told her mother about it. This was not deception. Zora didn't do deception. It was more like timing. She had found the application herself, 3 weeks ago, in the folder of school papers that her teacher, Mrs. Graham, kept in her desk drawer, and that Zora had seen when she'd stayed after class to help organize the supply closet. Accelerated Middle School Placement Program. Application for Financial Award. She had read it twice, completely, the way she read everything. The deadline was in 22 days. The school would cover the test portion and the teacher recommendation. What remained was the family documentation section, which required a parent's signature on 4 forms: proof of address, proof of income from the last 2 years, and a personal essay from a student. Zora had already written the essay. She had written it in a composition notebook and revised it twice without telling anyone. It was about the way she looked at things, about how noticing was not the same as being nosy, and how understanding a problem was the first step to fixing it, and how she had spent 9 years noticing the apartment they lived in and the neighborhood around it and the school she attended and the way the world worked, and had decided that the best thing she could do with all of that noticing was become someone who could actually change things. It was a good essay. She knew it was a good essay the way you knew when something was true, not with pride, but with certainty. The forms, though, the forms required her mother, and her mother was working 15-hour days and came home in the state she came home in, and Zora had been looking for the right moment for 3 weeks, and the right moment kept not arriving. And now there were 22 days, and the right moment needed to arrive soon. She was thinking about this on Saturday afternoon when Mrs. Claudette knocked on their door. Her mother was home, a rare Saturday off, earned by trading a shift with someone named Paulette who apparently owed her, and sitting on the couch with her feet up and the television on, not watching it. She looked up when Mrs. Claudette knocked. Zora opened the door. Mrs. Claudette did not come in. She stood in the doorway with her arms folded and a look on her face that meant she was being deliberate. "The hotel called this morning," she said, to Dina, not to Zora. Dina sat up. "Leanne Okafor, guest relations." Mrs. Claudette said the name carefully. "She wanted to speak with you." Dina looked at Zora. Zora looked at the floor, and then at her mother, and then at the floor again. "Zora," Dina said, quietly, not angrily, in the way she said Zora's name when she needed the whole truth, and she needed it now. Zora told the whole truth. She told it completely, the way she always told things, in the order it happened, with details she thought were relevant and without the ones she thought weren't, not leaving out any part that might matter. She told about the crowd and the man and the red indicator light. She told about what would have happened if he had pushed the door. When she finished, the apartment was quiet for a moment. Then Dina said, "You stopped to help a man outside the hotel." "Yes, ma'am." "A man you didn't know?" "Yes, ma'am. On your birthday. He was on a fall," Zora said simply. Dina looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at Mrs. Claudette. Something passed between the two women that Zora couldn't fully read. The particular communication of people who had known each other long enough to speak without words. "Leanne Okafor," Dina said. "What did she want?" "She wanted you to know," Mrs. Claudette said carefully, "that the man your daughter helped is a guest of the hotel." A pause. "A significant guest." Dina was very still. "How significant?" "He booked the 41st floor suite." Mrs. Claudette held Dina's gaze steadily. "For a month." Another silence. "He asked about her," Mrs. Claudette said. "The man." "He asked the guest relations team who she was." Dina looked at Zora again. Zora met her mother's eyes. There was a conversation happening in that look that was complicated. Her mother was proud and frightened and protective and uncertain, all at once, and Zora could see all of it. She waited. "Nobody is doing anything without me knowing about it," Dina said to Mrs. Claudette, to Zora, to the room. "Whatever this is." "Of course not," Mrs. Claudette said. "Nobody suggested otherwise." Dina looked at Zora. "You should have told me." "I know," Zora said. "I was waiting for the right time." "The right time is always immediately," Dina said. Zora thought about the scholarship forms and the 22 days and said nothing. underscore 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 the call from Leanne Okafor came to Dina's phone on Sunday at 11 in the morning, which was the first time Dina had been reachable on a weekend in several weeks. Leanne was professional, warm, and precise. She told Dina that the guest in the 41st floor suite had inquired about the family of the girl who had warned him about the door. She told Dina that the hotel was not in the business of sharing staff information with guests, but that in this particular case, the guest had simply asked that a message be passed along if the family was willing. The message was, Mr. Hale would appreciate the opportunity to express his gratitude in person, at the family's convenience. No obligation. Dina said she would think about it. She hung up and sat at the kitchen table and looked at her daughter. You understand, she said, that we don't know this man. I know, Zora said. You understand that powerful men don't send messages to thank little girls without a reason. Zora considered this carefully. Maybe his reason is just that he wants to say thank you. Dina looked at her. Mrs. Claudette says the hotel looked up who I was because he asked, Zora said. He could have just sent something. He didn't. He asked for a message to be passed. She paused. He was polite about it. He said at our convenience and no obligation. Dina was quiet for a long moment. How do you know he was polite about it? You didn't hear the message. Because that's what Leanne Okafor told you. And Leanne Okafor works for the hotel and would not pass along a message that was impolite. A pause. And because he said thank you to me that day. On the sidewalk. He was direct, but he wasn't rude. Dina's eyes moved over her daughter's face. 9 years old, she said, half to herself. Yes, ma'am. Her mother was quiet for a long time. Outside, Chicago moved through its Sunday morning. Traffic, someone's music from the street below, a dog barking on the block. I'll come with you, Dina said finally. If we go, I'll be there. Zora nodded. I know, and we decide when we leave. Okay. Dina pressed her lips together. And you tell me everything. Before it happens, not after. Zora thought about the scholarship forms. I have something to tell you, she said. About school. Underscore the forms were signed 2 hours later, at the kitchen table, with Zora walking her mother through each one and Dina asking careful, specific questions, the kind of questions that showed she was reading them properly and not just trusting Zora's summary. Zora got the document folder she had been keeping in the space between her mattress and the wall, not hidden, exactly, just stored, and laid everything out in order. When Dina read the essay, she read it twice. When she looked up, her eyes were doing something careful. You wrote this by yourself, she said. Yes, ma'am. Without telling me. I was going to tell you. Dina set the essay down. She put her hand flat on it, on the paper, the way you put your hand on something you needed to be real. Then she said quietly, Zora Mae, you've been carrying all of this by yourself. Zora looked at her mother's hand on the essay. I carry things that I can carry, she said. I was going to tell you when I had a plan. This is the plan. Part of it. Zora looked at the forms. The other part is the test. Mrs. Graham said I'm ready. Dina was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up the pen. Show me where to sign. She signed all 4 forms. She signed them in her careful, cramped handwriting, the same handwriting that said you see things the rest of us miss in silver on a birthday card that Zora had already read 7 times. When she was done, she put the pen down and looked at her daughter. We can call the hotel back, she said. We'll go Monday, after your school and before my shift. A pause. I'll be there the whole time. I know, Zora said. And if anything feels wrong, we leave, Zora said. Dina nodded. Then she reached across the table and touched her daughter's face, briefly, with the back of her dry, careful hand. You're something else, she said. Zora smiled. It was the real smile, not the careful one, not the one she wore in public, but the one that lived under everything else, the one that came out when she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Happy birthday, her mother said. Monday came the way important days come when you are 9, the same as every other day at first, until it wasn't. Zora woke before the sun again. She lay still and listened to the apartment. The pipes were quiet. Her mother's footsteps were already moving in the kitchen, which meant she had been up for a while. Through the wall, Mrs. Claudette's television was off, which meant Mrs. Claudette had slept well, which meant the day was starting correctly. Zora got up and dressed carefully. Not in anything special. She didn't own anything special, but in what she thought of as her serious clothes. The dark jeans without the frayed left knee. The green sweater that fit properly. She braided her own hair the way Nana Rose had taught her, 2 tight plaits that stayed in place all day without anyone having to check on them. She was ready in 11 minutes. Her mother was in the kitchen in her off-duty clothes, which was its own kind of unusual on a weekday. Dina Tatum in her own clothes, not her uniform, looked softer and more herself. A red sweater, her dark coat laid over the chair, her feet in the flat shoes she wore when she wanted to be comfortable. She had made oatmeal. She was stirring it and not looking at it, which meant she was thinking. "You sleep?" Zora asked. "Enough," Dina said, which was not the same thing. She looked at Zora. "You?" "Yes." A pause. "You look nice." Dina glanced down at herself. "I look like me." "That's what I said." Dina set a bowl on the table. Zora climbed onto the stool and ate. The oatmeal had brown sugar and the cinnamon that Dina put in when she was paying attention and not just doing the task. That was another way to read the morning. The cinnamon meant her mother was present, not somewhere else. They ate together in the particular quiet that existed between people who knew each other completely and didn't need noise to fill the space. At 8:45, Dina said, "School first. I'll meet you at the corner of Michigan and Wacker at noon. We go in together." "Together," Zora confirmed. "If anything feels wrong, we leave." "I know." Dina looked at her daughter over the rim of her coffee cup. "You're not scared," she said. "No," Zora said. It wasn't bravado. It was just true. "Are you?" Dina set down her cup. "A little," she said, with the honesty that was one of the things Zora loved most about her mother. The refusal to pretend to a courage she wasn't feeling just because her child was watching. Not of him, exactly. Of not knowing what he wants. Of things I can't see yet. Zora nodded. "That's fair." Dina raised an eyebrow. "Fair," she repeated. "It's rational to be cautious about incomplete information," Zora said. "Mrs. Graham says that." "Mrs. Graham says a lot," Dina observed. "She's usually right." Dina picked up her coat. "Let's go." Underscore. The Meridian Grand looked different at noon than it had on Friday afternoon. The sidewalk crowd was gone, replaced by the ordinary flow of a Monday lunch hour. Business people in dark coats, a couple with luggage, a man on his phone walking the full length of the block without looking at anything. The revolving door had a small yellow maintenance sign, taped beside it, and was running correctly. Zora noticed this automatically. The side entrance was where Leanne Okafor was waiting. Leanne was a tall woman with close-cut natural hair and the kind of steady expression that belonged to someone who had managed crises in hotel lobbies and had developed the ability to project calm as a professional skill. She greeted Dina first, with a handshake and something that was genuine rather than performed. "Mrs. Tatum, thank you for coming." "Ms. Tatum," Dina said, with the precise, quiet self-possession that Zora had inherited. "Ms. Tatum," Leanne said without flinching. "And you must be Zora." She looked at Zora with the particular attention of an adult who was used to assessing people quickly. Something in her expression settled. "I heard what you did on Friday." "I saw the censor," Zora said. "I know." A small pause. "I've worked in this hotel for 11 years. I've walked past that door thousands of times. I didn't know what the censor meant." She said this plainly, without embarrassment, which was the right way to say it. "You did." Zora said nothing. This was not the moment for explaining. Leanne led them through the staff corridor. Zora watched her mother's face as they passed through the back hallways of the hotel, the parts guests never saw, and saw the small shift of recognition there. The way Dina's shoulders carried the knowledge of this space the same way Zora carried the knowledge of their apartment. This was her mother's world in a way the front lobby was not. The polished carts, the supply closets, the particular smell of industrial cleaning products and fresh linen. Dina knew exactly where everything was. They took the elevator, the guest elevator this time, not the service one, to the 41st floor. Zora watched the numbers go up. Leon knocked at the door of Suite 4102. It opened almost immediately. Colin opened it. Zora had not met Colin before, but she recognized him the way she recognized anyone who appeared in the context she'd been thinking about. He was the assistant. She was certain of that within the first second, because of the tablet and the way he held himself. Useful and invisible at the same time, which is a very specific combination. He looked at Dina and offered a handshake. He looked at Zora and said, "Mr. Hale is expecting you." Marcus Hale was standing at the window when they came in. He had more color than he'd had on Friday. He was dressed differently. The suit was still expensive, but slightly less formal, the jacket off, the collar of the shirt open at the top, which Zora thought was probably as casual as Marcus Hale got. He turned when they entered, and his eyes went first to Dina, then to Zora, and stayed there. "Miss Tatum," he said, to Dina, crossing the room with the careful deliberateness of someone who had been advised to move slowly and was complying. He shook her hand. "Thank you for coming. I want you to know that nothing about this meeting is an obligation. If you'd like to leave at any point, we leave." Dina studied him for a moment. "Thank you," she said. He looked at Zora. Something in his face moved. Not a smile, not quite. Recognition. "Hello again." "Hello," Zora said. "Sit down, please." He gestured to the sitting area, a low table, cream-colored chairs, a view of the lake that filled the window entirely. Dina sat in the chair closest to the door, which Zora noted and understood. Marcus sat across from them. Colin stood at a respectful distance, near the far wall. "I asked you here," Marcus said, looking at Dina first, then Zora, "because I wanted to say thank you properly, not through the hotel. Directly." A pause. "What your daughter did on Friday was not a small thing." Dina was very still. "She tells me she saw a sensor." "She did." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "The mechanism on that door, if I had pushed in the state I was in, I was already unsteady, my blood pressure was elevated significantly. I would have gone down. Possibly badly." He paused. "I have been told by the medical staff that the timing of intervention mattered. If I had fallen and hit the edge of that stone planter," he stopped. He looked at Zora. "You were paying attention when no one else was." Zora looked back at him steadily. "The door looked wrong," she said. "I saw the light." "You knew what the light meant." "School field trip. To a science museum." They had a whole exhibit on mechanisms in public spaces. Elevators, escalators, revolving doors. She paused. "I remember things." Something in Marcus Hale's expression shifted. He looked at her the way he had looked at her on the sidewalk. That assessing attention, that particular quality of recognition that she had noticed then and could see clearly now. He was not looking at her the way adults usually looked at her, which was either with the kind of fondness that meant they weren't quite taking her seriously, or with a slightly uncomfortable interest that meant they were. He was looking at her the way you looked at someone who had surprised you and you were deciding what to do with the surprise. "Your mother works here," he said. "Yes, sir. 18th floor." Zora looked at him steadily. "You looked us up." A very small pause. "Yes," he said. "I did." Dina's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Zora saw it. "My name is Marcus Hale," he said to Dina. "I run the Hale Group. We're a development and investment firm. I'm in Chicago working on a project." He looked at Dina directly. "I know that the fact that I looked into your family is the kind of thing that should be explained before anything else happens. I did it because I wanted to understand who had helped me, not to use the information, to understand." Dina looked at him. "What did you find?" "That your daughter is in the 4th grade at Roosevelt Elementary. That she was nominated for an accelerated placement program. That you work on the 18th floor of this hotel and have for 6 years. And that your record here is, by every account, excellent." He paused. "And that you have been working shifts that leave very little time for anything else." Dina was quiet. "I'm not saying this to make you uncomfortable," Marcus said. "I'm saying it because I want you to understand why I am about to offer something and why the offer is not charity. Dina said, "What's the offer?" Marcus looked at Zora first. "I have a meeting tomorrow morning," he said. "An important meeting. A signing." He looked back at Dina. "I have a problem with that meeting that I have been working on since Friday. Part of that problem is that a person I trusted is not going to be in the room, and I need certain gaps filled." He paused. "I'm not asking a 9-year-old girl to fill those gaps." Dina's expression had not changed. "But," Marcus said, and he looked at Zora again, "I have spent 3 days failing to get certain information organized in a way that makes sense. My assistant is excellent at what he does, but there are things that need a different kind of looking." He paused. "The way you looked at that door. The way you saw what no one else saw." Zora tilted her head. "You want me to look at something? I want you to listen to something," Marcus said, "and tell me what you notice." Underscore. Colin brought in a folder. Dina's eyes went to it immediately. Zora watched her mother's face go through a calculation. "This is real. This is happening. What do I do with this?" And watched her come out the other side of it with a steady expression that meant she had decided to stay present and see. "This is not confidential business information," Marcus said, which was for Dina's benefit as much as Zora's. "What I want to describe to you is a situation, a problem that involves a person I trusted. He stopped. He looked at Zora. "You're going to think this is strange." "Probably not," Zora said. Colin made a small sound that was almost a laugh and covered it immediately. Marcus looked at Zora for a moment. Then, with the slight adjustment of a man who had decided to simply proceed, "There is a person, a colleague, who has been making agreements on my behalf. And I have recently discovered that some of those agreements were also being made on behalf of someone else. Someone with competing interests." He paused. "When I think about what he has done, I can trace certain moments. Certain points where something could have been seen if someone was looking. But when I try to describe it, the pattern disappears." "Tell me the moments," Zora said. Her mother looked at her. "The ones you're thinking about," Zora said. "Not in order. Just the ones that feel wrong when you look back at them." Marcus was quiet for a moment. He looked at Dina, not to ask permission, more to acknowledge that she was present, and this concerned her too. Dina gave a very small nod that was not quite agreement, and not quite refusal, but was something in between that meant "I'm watching." Marcus began to talk. He talked about a lunch 2 years ago, where Gerard Marsh had introduced him to a property developer from Philadelphia named Kovacs, and Marcus had liked Kovacs immediately and had thought afterward how unlike Gerard it was to simply introduce someone without a context or purpose. He talked about a document revision 8 months ago, where 3 paragraphs in a 40-page agreement had been reworded in ways that technically meant the same thing, but shifted the position of a particular obligation by 18 months. He talked about a phone call in September where he had walked into a room where Gerard was speaking, and the conversation had stopped in a way that conversations stopped when they had been about something that wasn't meant to be heard. He talked about these things the way a person talked about things they had been carrying and hadn't been able to set down, not chaotically, but with the particular pressure of accumulated weight. Zora listened. She sat completely still in the cream-colored chair, her hands in her lap, and she listened the way she listened to everything, completely, without performing listening, just doing it. When Marcus stopped, the suite was quiet. Then Zora said, "Kovacs." Marcus looked at her. "He introduced you to Kovacs, but didn't tell you why," she said. "And Kovacs is connected to the person he's working with now." Marcus's expression changed. "Yes," he said. "I believe so. I'm still tracing the exact structure." And the document revision, the one where the obligation shifted 18 months. Whose obligation was it? "One of the parties we're meeting tomorrow," Marcus said slowly. "A company that is supposed to provide infrastructure guarantees. If their obligation shifted 18 months, they would have," he stopped. "They would have more time to arrange something else," Zora said. "And if that something else was already arranged with the other person, then the 18 months wasn't a gift to them," Marcus said. "It was a guarantee that the original deal would fall apart before it had to." The suite was very quiet. Dina was looking at her daughter. Colin was looking at Marcus. Marcus was looking at Zora Tatum, 9 years old, sitting in a cream-colored chair 41 floors above Chicago, who had just completed a sentence he had not been able to complete in 72 hours. "Wow," he said. Then he stopped and started again. You described a pattern," Zora said simply. "You just couldn't see it because you were too close to the people in it. The feelings were in the way." A pause. When you look at something the way you look at a person you trust, you can also look at it the way you look at a problem. She thought about this for a moment. That's not a criticism. It's just hard to do both at once. Marcus said nothing for a long moment. Something was moving behind his eyes that Zora couldn't name precisely, but could feel. The particular movement of a person arriving at something they had been near for a long time. "The signing tomorrow," he said finally. "If that is the correct pattern, it might not be," Zora said. "I only have the pieces you gave me. There might be pieces that change it. But if it is," Zora looked at him levelly, "then whoever you're signing with tomorrow, at least one of them already knows about the other agreement. They're not coming to your signing to close a deal. They're coming to confirm that the deal they're already in is going to work." Marcus stood up. He went to the window. He stood there with his back to them for what Zora counted as 37 seconds, looking at the lake. Then he turned back. He looked at Dina. "Miss Tatum," he said, "I owe your daughter more than I can adequately express. But right now, what I owe her might be less urgent than what she has just given me." If this story has found you, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story from Bound Hearts. The best ones are still coming, and the people who watch to the end are exactly the ones who need to hear them. Zora Tatum had a way of being still when she was making a decision. It was different from ordinary stillness. It was the stillness of someone who had learned that the quality of a decision was directly related to the quality of the pause before it. She was still now. "You want my daughter to explain this to you further," she said. "I want her to look at the documents," Marcus said. "The actual agreements. She doesn't have to read them all. I can walk her through the relevant sections. And I want to hear what she notices." A pause. "I'm not asking her to work. I'm asking her to look." Dina looked at Zora. Zora looked back at her mother with a clear, undemanding gaze that was one of the things Dina privately thought was both her daughter's greatest strength and the thing that sometimes broke her heart a little, the absence of neediness in it, the steadiness. Zora was not asking permission. She was waiting for judgment. The difference mattered. 20 minutes, Dina said. "I'm in the room. And if at any point we stop," Marcus said. Immediately. Dina nodded once. Colin produced the documents. They were not like the documents Zora had read before. Not like the school forms, or the library books, or even a newspaper that Mr. Abdi kept on the counter at the corner store that she sometimes read while he was on the phone. These were documents written by lawyers for lawyers, in a language that was technically English but had been rearranged to be as precise as possible and, as a consequence, as impenetrable as possible. Zora was not impenetrable by them. She was not impenetrable by them because the language didn't matter the way the structure did. She didn't read every word. She read the way she looked at any space. She looked at the shape of it, where the weight was where the connections were. She read the same way she had looked at the door sensor, not at the entire building, just at the thing that was showing red. Marcus walked her through the relevant sections, as he had promised. He spoke in plain terms, which she appreciated, translating the legal language without being told to. He had been talking to lawyers and executives for 30 years and had not forgotten how to speak to people who weren't. That told her something about him. 3 sections in, Zora said, This clause. Marcus leaned in. This says the infrastructure guarantee is triggered by a written notice from the lead party, Zora said. But in the section before, it says the lead party designation can transfer automatically under certain conditions. She looked up. What are the conditions? Marcus took the document. He read. His expression changed. If the original party fails to execute a co-signatory provision within 14 days of initial signing, he read slowly. Zora nodded. And the co-signatory is Gerard. Marcus set the paper down. He set it down with careful, deliberate precision, the way you set something down when you're being very controlled about what your hands are doing. The co-signatory provision requires Gerard's signature. And if Gerard doesn't sign within 14 days, the lead party designation transfers, Zora said, which means whoever receives it would control when the infrastructure guarantee triggers. Marcus looked at the paper. He looked at Zora. He looked at the paper again. He doesn't need to be absent from the signing tomorrow, Marcus said quietly, to himself as much as to her. He needs to be absent from the co-signatory provision. 14 days after tomorrow. Zora was quiet. She was watching his face. There was something happening in it that she recognized from the sidewalk on Friday. The color was not good, but for a different reason now. Not his body this time. The 72 hours of accumulated weight sitting on him. Are you okay? She asked. Marcus looked at her. Something in his expression shifted. The same shift she had seen when she told him he didn't look good on Friday. That very slight recalibration. The arrival of something unexpected. He was not used to being asked if he was okay by people who actually wanted to know. I will be, he said. He looked at Dina. Dina was watching him with the careful, measuring gaze she used for things she was still deciding about. Your daughter has found something that 3 attorneys and I have been looking for since Friday, he said. Not all of it, but the part we needed. He paused. I don't know how to properly account for that. Dina said, you don't have to account for it. I'd like to. That's different from having to. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, may I ask you something? Dina waited. The scholarship program, he said, for middle school placement. The documentation is submitted this month. Dina's stillness changed quality. Not warmer, not colder, just more present. The application requires an income verification from the past 2 years, Marcus said. I understand that your work schedule has made it difficult to gather the documentation. Dina looked at her daughter. Zora looked at the window. Colin can have a full income verification document prepared from the hotel's HR records within the hour, Marcus said. Not as a favor, as something that is yours, that the hotel should have made accessible to you already. He paused. We would also be glad to provide a letter of character reference from the hotel's management. Dina's jaw moved slightly. Then she said, what do you want in return? Marcus looked at her. Nothing, he said. This is not a transaction. Everything is a transaction. Not this. A pause. Your daughter is. I don't have language for what your daughter is. But whatever she is, it is not something you created for someone else's benefit. That belongs to her. And to you. And I am not in the business of purchasing things that aren't mine. He looked at Zora. She didn't stop me from falling because she wanted something from me. I'm not going to offer her something because I want something from her. The suite was very quiet. Dina said, the income verification. Colin will have it before you leave today. Dina looked at her daughter for a long moment. Zora looked back. Between them passed that communication without words, the one that had been developing for 9 years, through every type morning and 15-hour day and signed form and birthday card with silver writing. Then Dina looked at Marcus Hale and said, thank you. Understood. Tuesday morning came in gray. Zora was at school by 8. The scholarship forms were in the folder, which was in her backpack, which she was going to give to Mrs. Graham before first period with the completed income verification document. Printed on hotel letterhead, organized and clear, exactly what was needed, tucked behind the sign forms. She was going to do this calmly, without drama, because that was how you did important things. She did it calmly. She did it without drama. Mrs. Graham looked at the folder, looked at Zora, and said, this is everything. And Zora said, yes, ma'am. And that was that. She was in math class when it happened. Or, she was in math class when the part she would learn about later was happening. She didn't know it was happening while she was in math class, working through a problem about geometric sequences that she had finished before the rest of the class got to the third step, waiting quietly with her pencil down. What was happening 41 floors above the Chicago River? Marcus Hale had gone into his signing meeting at 10 o'clock with the three parties and his restructured legal team and a revised set of documents that his attorneys had spent the night rewriting after Marcus had called them at 11 p.m. with specific instructions about which clauses to revise and why. The co-signatory provision had been restructured. The lead party designation language had been corrected, and Marcus had disclosed, privately and specifically, to two of the three parties across the table, that there was an issue with his original lead counsel and that the meeting was proceeding under new arrangements. Two of the three parties had absorbed this and adjusted. The third, a man named Vincent Arlo, who represented the infrastructure group, had not adjusted. He had arrived at the meeting looking at his phone in a way that Marcus now understood. He had looked at the revised document language with a particular stillness, and then he had said that he needed to make a call before proceeding and excused himself from the room. Marcus had let him go, because Marcus now knew what Zora had understood in the suite the previous afternoon. One of those three men was not at the table to close a deal. He was at the table to confirm that a different deal was still in play. And when he left to make his call and found that what he was calling to confirm no longer existed, the meeting had continued without Vincent Arlo. Two of the three parties had signed. The infrastructure guarantee, restructured, airtight, no co-signatory provision that could expire, had been executed. The lakefront development deal was real in the way that only ink on paper and money in accounts made things real. Marcus Hale had sat alone in the meeting room for 11 minutes after everyone else left, looking at the signed documents, not speaking. Colin had stood near the wall and waited. After 11 minutes, Marcus had stood up and said, "Get me Gerard." Colin had said, "He's available." Marcus had said, "Not on the phone." Underscore. Didn't know any of this when she walked out of school at 3:15. She knew it because Marcus Hale had sent a message to Leanne Okafor at the Meridian Grand, and Leanne Okafor had called Dina Tatum's phone at 2:45, and Dina had called Mrs. Claudette, and Mrs. Claudette was waiting at the bottom of the school steps when Zora came out. "Come inside," Mrs. Claudette said. "Your mother called." They sat at Mrs. Claudette's kitchen table. The television was on, but the sound was off, which meant this was a conversation that required full attention. "The meeting went well," Mrs. Claudette said. She was watching Zora carefully. "Your mother says Mr. Hale called to tell her. He wanted you to know." Zora nodded. Two of the three parties signed. The third one, Mrs. Claudette paused, left the meeting before the signing. "Arlo," Zora said. Mrs. Claudette raised an eyebrow. "You know about Arlo?" "I knew about one of them," Zora said. "I didn't know which one until now." Mrs. Claudette looked at her steadily. "Baby, what exactly did you do at that hotel yesterday?" Zora thought about how to explain it. She thought about the documents and the clause and the pattern that Marcus had been too close to see. "I looked at something he couldn't see properly," she said, "because he was too close to it." Mrs. Claudette was quiet for a moment. "And now the deal is done." "Most of it," Zora said. "He still has to deal with Gerard." She paused. "That's the harder part." Mrs. Claudette made the sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something more complicated. "How do you know that's the harder part?" Zora thought about the 37 seconds Marcus had stood at the window. The way he had set the document down with careful, deliberate precision. The way it said 12 years, not out loud, but she had seen it in his face, the number sitting there. "Because Gerard was his friend," she said. "The deal is just the deal. But Gerard was his friend." Mrs. Claudette looked at her for a long time. Outside, Chicago went through its Tuesday afternoon. Traffic on the street, a bus hissing to a stop, someone laughing on the sidewalk below the window. "Your mother is coming home by 7 tonight," Mrs. Claudette said. "She asked to have dinner here. All three of us." Okay, Zora said. Mr. Hale also said. Mrs. Claudette picked up the piece of paper she'd written on. She had handwriting that was large and looping, the handwriting of someone who had learned it in a time when handwriting was taught as its own subject. He said to tell you that the information you found is going to require confirmation through his legal team, but that it changes the picture significantly, and that he would like to speak with you and your mother again, this week, if possible. She set the paper down. He said it wasn't urgent. Zora looked at the paper. Claudette, she said, she only called her this when she was being serious, and they both knew it. Do you think he's a good person? Mrs. Claudette thought about this properly, the way she thought about important questions. Not immediately, not with the first thing that came to mind. She folded her hands on the table and looked at the middle distance for a moment. I think, she said finally, he is a person who has spent a long time in a world that doesn't require him to be particularly good. And I think something happened to him on Friday on that sidewalk that hasn't happened to him in a while. She paused, and I think a 9-year-old girl is making him reconsider some things. Zora considered this. That could go a lot of ways, she said. It could, Mrs. Claudette agreed. That's why your mom is coming home by 7. We eat together and we talk it through. She stood up. Now, you want more pound cake, or do you want the sweet potato bread I made this morning? Both, Zora said. Thought so. Underscore. Dina arrived at 6:52. She came into Mrs. Claudette's apartment with her coat still on and her eyes doing the thing they did when she had been processing something for a long time and had arrived at a decision but wasn't quite ready to say it yet. She hugged Zora first before she even took her coat off. A real hug, the kind that said, I've been thinking about you all day. They ate at Mrs. Claudette's table. Chicken, rice, green beans with the kind of seasoning Mrs. Claudette had been making since before anyone at the table was born. Zora ate everything and watched her mother and watched Mrs. Claudette and listened to the conversation move through the meal. Then Dina set down her fork and looked at her daughter. He called me again this afternoon, she said. Not through the hotel. He had my number from the hotel records. A pause. He apologized for that first. What did he say? Zora asked. He said the deal is done and your name is part of why. She stopped. He didn't say it exactly like that. He said, she looked at the paper she'd pulled from her coat pocket, a piece of paper she'd written on during the call, that a perspective he hadn't been able to access on his own became available to him because of you, and that he was not in the habit of allowing debts of that kind to go unacknowledged. Zora looked at the paper in her mother's hand. What does he want to do? Dina looked at her. He wants to offer you scholarship. The table was quiet. Not the one you applied for, Dina said. A separate one. The Hale Group has an education program. It's for students from Chicago. It covers middle school and high school at one of the top preparatory academies in the city, fully. And it includes a college fund. That grows. She set the paper down. It would change your schooling. Completely. Zora was very still. It would also change mine, Dina said, and her voice was careful now, each word placed deliberately. He said, separately, that there is a management position opening at the hotel. Facilities coordination. It's a day shift, regular hours. She paused. He said he is not offering it to me because of you. He said he's offering it because my 6-year record is the reason I should already be in that position. She pressed her lips together. He may be right about that. Mrs. Claudette was looking at the table. Dina looked at Zora. What do you think? She asked. Zora thought about the 37 seconds at the window, about the document clause, about Kovacs and Gerard and the 18 months that was supposed to make a deal fall apart. She thought about her mother's handwriting. You see things the rest of us miss. Never stop. She thought about the composition notebook with the essay she'd written twice and revised without telling anyone. She looked at her mother. I think, she said carefully, that we should know more before we decide. I think we should know what the academy is and what the program actually requires and what the facilities position involves. A pause. And I think we should talk to a lawyer. Someone who's ours, not his. Dina blinked. Then she looked at Mrs. Claudette. Mrs. Claudette was smiling. Not the complicated smile, not the holding something back smile. The real one. "You hear this, child?" she said. Dina looked at her daughter. Something in her expression was beyond words, and she did not try to find them. She simply reached across the table and put her hand over Zora's, the dry, careful hand with the slight ache in the left joint that Zora hadn't noticed since she was 5, and held it. "Yes," she said. "I hear her." Understood. Underscore. There was one more thing, though. One thing that Zora had not said at the table. Not because she was keeping it, but because she was still working out what it meant. She had been at the hotel on Monday afternoon, in the suite, looking at the documents, when she had heard something. It had been during the 20 minutes with the documents, when Marcus was explaining the clauses and Colin was near the wall. Zora's attention had been on the paper, but she had been hearing the room at the same time, the way she always heard rooms. And she had heard Colin, at the far wall, speaking very quietly into his phone. She had not been meant to hear it. She was quite certain of that. The conversation was 3 sentences, low and fast, and then it stopped. 3 sentences. She remembered them exactly, the way she remembered everything exactly. "He knows about the clause." Yes, both of them. She found it. She had not been able to identify who Colin was speaking to. She had not been able to determine whether the conversation was innocent. A report to the legal team, perhaps, or a call to one of the parties being briefed ahead of the signing. There were a dozen explanations that were not alarming. But Zora Tatum was 9 years old, and she had learned to pay attention to the things that felt wrong before she could name them. She found it. Not he found it. Not the attorneys found it. She had been in that room for less than 20 minutes. The only person in the world who knew she'd found anything in that room was Marcus Hale. And Colin. She lay in bed that night and turned this over. She was not afraid. She was not even certain it mattered. But she was 9 years old, and she had eyes in her chest as well as her head, and something in those eyes was still watching. She would tell her mother tomorrow. She would tell her mother everything. But tonight, she lay in the dark and listened to Chicago and thought about a sentence that had not been meant for her, and she thought about a man named Colin who arrived within 11 minutes of anything, and she thought about the particular way some patterns stayed red, even when you wanted them to turn another color. She was not yet afraid. But she was paying attention, and that, in Zora Tatum's experience, was where everything important always started. Wednesday morning, Zora told her mother everything. She told it the way she told everything, in order, with details that mattered and without the ones that didn't. She told her about the suite, the documents, the clause. And then she told her about Colin's phone call. The 3 sentences. The exact words. "He knows about the clause." Yes, both of them. She found it. Dina listened without interrupting. She sat at the kitchen table with her coffee in both hands and her face in that stillness that meant she was putting things in the correct order before speaking. When Zora finished, Dina said, "You waited until this morning." "I needed to think about it first," Zora said. "I didn't want to say it wrong." "You never say things wrong." "I say things incomplete sometimes." "I wanted it to be complete." Dina looked at her coffee. "You think Colin is reporting to someone?" "I think he might be," Zora said carefully. "Or he might have a perfectly reasonable explanation. I don't know which." She paused. "But the word she is the part that stays wrong. Nobody outside that room knew I'd found anything. Marcus didn't tell anyone before I left. So either Colin told someone himself, or she stopped. Or someone already knew you were coming," Dina said. "And was waiting to hear what you did when you got there," Zora said. The kitchen was quiet. Dina set down her coffee cup. "I'm calling Leanne Okafor." "Wait," Zora said. Dina looked at her. "Leanne Okafor arranged the meeting," Zora said. She passed the message. She's been," she thought carefully. "She's been helpful. But she works for the hotel. And the hotel is connected to Marcus. And if Colin is reporting to someone inside the hotel's ownership structure," Dina was very still. "You think it goes further than Gerard?" "I don't know," Zora said. "That's the part that's incomplete." She looked at her mother steadily. "We should tell Marcus directly, not through anyone else. Directly. Dina looked at her daughter for a long moment. Then she stood up, went to her coat, and found the piece of paper with the number Marcus Hale had given her during their phone call the previous afternoon. She called it. He answered in 2 rings. "Ms. Tatum, my daughter has something to tell you," Dina said. "She needs to tell you in person. Today. And without Colin in the room." A pause. 3 seconds, which in a conversation with Marcus Hale was a long pause. 11 o'clock, he said. "The side entrance. I'll come down myself." He came down himself. That was the first thing Zora noted. Not Colin, not Leanne, not anyone on staff. Marcus Hale in his overcoat came through the side entrance of the Meridian Grand at 11 o'clock exactly and stood on the sidewalk where Zora and Dina were waiting, and his eyes went first to Zora with the attention that was becoming familiar. "You have something to tell me," he said. Not a question. "Yes, sir," Zora said. "Not inside." He didn't argue. He stepped further onto the sidewalk, away from the entrance, and turned so his back was to the building and he could see the street. It was a cold Wednesday, the wind off the lake doing what Chicago wind did in October, and all 3 of them stood in their coats in the thin autumn light while Zora said what she had to say. She told him about Colin's phone call, the same way she had told her mother, in order, exact, complete. She watched Marcus Hale's face move through the 3 sentences the way she watched everything, looking for the pattern beneath the surface. What she saw was not what she had expected. She had expected surprise. She had expected the recalibration that usually happened when people heard something they hadn't known. What she saw instead was something quieter and heavier. Not surprise. Recognition. Marcus looked at her when she finished. "Say the last sentence again," he said. "She found it," Zora said. He was quiet for a moment. "Not the girl," he said. "She." "Yes, sir." He looked out at the street. A bus went past. Someone on a bicycle. The city moving through its Wednesday, indifferent to what was happening on the sidewalk. "Colin has worked for me for 8 years, he said. "I know," Zora said. "I trusted him the same way I trusted Gerard." "I know." He looked at her. "You're not surprised?" "I was uncertain," she said. "That's different." "I didn't know if the explanation was innocent." "I still don't know for certain." She paused. "But you just said you weren't surprised, which means some part of you already knew something was wrong." Marcus was very still. Then he said, "There was a document. 6 months ago. I couldn't find a copy of a revised term sheet that I was certain existed. Colin told me it hadn't been drafted yet." He stopped. "I believe him because I had no reason not to." He looked at his own hands. The term sheet would have shown that certain conditions were already met. Conditions that would have given me leverage I didn't know I had. Dina, who had been standing quietly through all of this, said, "So he hid it. Or made it disappear," Marcus said. "Yes." "On behalf of who?" Dina asked. Marcus looked up. "That's the part one don't know yet." He paused. "But I can find out." He looked at Zora one more time. "You came to me directly," he said. "Not through the hotel. Not through Leanne. You said not to report to anyone," Zora said. "On the sidewalk last Friday, when you were sitting on the planter. You said it to the manager. You said you didn't want anything communicated through the hotel's channels until you understood the situation." She paused. I remembered. Marcus Hale stood on the sidewalk in the October wind and looked at Zora Tatum and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "You remembered a conversation you weren't part of?" "I was standing right there," Zora said. "I was just quiet." He found out. Not immediately. He found out the way real things were found out. Through his legal team, working through the night with the information Zora had provided, tracing the thread of Colin's communications against the timeline of the Gerard situation and the documents that had disappeared. What they found was not Gerard alone. Gerard had been the instrument, but the person behind it was the property developer from Philadelphia, Kovacs. The same Kovacs that Gerard had introduced at a lunch 2 years ago as a casual connection. Kovacs had needed the lakefront deal to fall apart before it locked. He had funded the competing arrangement and used Gerard as its architect. And in the final weeks before the signing, when Marcus had started to see the edges of the problem, Kovacs had made contact with Colin through channels designed to look like normal business correspondence. Colin had been reporting Marcus's progress, what he was learning, who was helping him learn it. She found it. When Marcus called Wednesday evening with the results, he asked to speak with Zora directly. She took the phone. "You were right to come to me outside," he said. "If you had gone through the hotel, the call would have been flagged. Kovacs would have known within the hour that the thread had been pulled." Zora absorbed this. "Colin didn't know I was 9, she said. "No. He thought you were a consultant." A pause. "He has been cooperating fully. His role was limited but real. He is no longer employed by the Hale Group. And Kovacs, under investigation," Marcus said. "Gerard has cooperated completely. The kind of cooperation that happens when someone has been caught cleanly and understands the situation." He paused.